I have kept a ledger every day of my life since I was 11 years old, whether in the top corner. Calves born, fences mended, money owed, money lost. My father told me once that if you don't write a thing down, it didn't happen, and God knows I've had enough things not happen to me that I decided early I'd keep an honest account of the ones that did. So understand me when I tell you, what I'm about to lay out is not a story. It's a record. Every line of it I saw or heard or held in my own two hands. It begins on a Tuesday in October, in the worst storm of that year, with a little girl standing in my barn door holding a rusted lunch tin like it was the last warm thing in the world. She was soaked to the bone, and she would not come inside, and she said the only complete sentence she'd say for 2 days. My mama told me to find a man who writes things down. I did not know then that a United States senator had spent 4 years and a great deal of money making sure a certain thing had never happened. I did not know that the little girl's tin was the reason it had. I only knew it was cold, and she was shaking, and somewhere behind her the dark was moving in a way dark isn't supposed to move. I'm an old man now. I've forgotten the names of horses I loved, but I have never once forgotten what was inside that tin or what it cost the 3 of us to make the world look at it. Let me tell it in order. That's the only way I know how. The rain came sideways that Tuesday, the kind that doesn't fall so much as get thrown at you, and I was in the barn past midnight because a mare named Duchess had colic, and I'd rather lose sleep than lose a horse. I'd already lost enough that year to make me stingy about it. I had my ledger open on a hay bale. I always do, even in a crisis, maybe especially in a crisis, because writing the numbers down is the only way I keep my hands from shaking. 10:40 walked her. 11:15 walked her. Rain heavy, wind out of the northwest, worst I've logged since the March Mara passed. I don't know why I still note the weather in relation to my dead wife. I just do. Grief keeps its own accounting, and you don't get a say in the ledger it hands you. I heard the barn door before I saw anything. Not the wind had been at that door all night. This was different. A small, deliberate scrape, the sound of something choosing to come in. I turned, and there she was. 9 years old, I'd guess, though she was small for it. Yellow slicker 2 sizes too big, the sleeves swallowing her hands. Her hair was plastered flat, and her lips had gone the pale blue color that scares you in a child. And she was holding a lunch tin against her chest with both arms, the way you'd hold a baby or a bomb. Well, I said, it's what I say, it buys me time. You're a ways from anywhere, aren't you? She didn't answer. Her eyes went around the barn, the stall, the mare, the lantern, me, like she was checking each one off a list somebody had given her. Then she looked at the ledger open on the hay bale, and something in her face eased about 1/4 of an inch. My mama told me to find a man who writes things down, she said. And then she wouldn't say anything else. I've replayed that moment more times than I can count. If I'd been a smarter man or a more suspicious one, I might have done a dozen things differently. Called the sheriff right off. Asked her name harder. But I was a tired widower with a sick horse and a soft spot the size of a barn door, and all I could see was a freezing child. So I did the only thing that made sense. Come sit by the lantern, I said. It's warm, Duchess won't mind the company. She's grumpy, but she's got manners. She came, slow, watching me the whole way, keeping the tin between us. She sat where I pointed, on the overturned feed bucket, and she started to shiver so hard I could hear the tin rattling faintly against the buttons of her slicker. I took off my coat and put it over her shoulders. She flinched when I got close, flinched the way an animal does that's learned a hand can mean a blow, and I made a note of that flinch somewhere deeper than the ledger. You spend your life around skittish creatures. You learn to read the thing under the thing. Whatever this child had been through, part of it had taught her that grown men were weather to be survived. I'm Cal, I said. Cal Renner, this here's my place, Dry Fork, you're safe in it. Nothing. You got a name. She looked at the tin, then very quietly, Wren. Like the bird. A tiny nod. And that was the whole of our conversation for that first night. I did what you do. I got hot water into her cocoa from a packet 3 years past its date, which she drank like it was the finest thing ever made. I found dry clothes, an old flannel of Mara's that came down to Wren's ankles, and I turned my back like a gentleman while she changed in the tack room. I made up the cot in the mudroom where I sometimes sleep during calving. And the whole time she would not put down that tin, not to change, not to sleep. She hooked one arm through the cot rail and held the tin with the other, and she watched the door until her eyes finally lost the fight around 3 in the morning. I sat up the rest of the night, told myself it was for Duchess. It wasn't. I studied that child by lantern light and I cataloged her the way I catalog everything because it's the only tool I've got. Store-brand sneakers soaked through, a hole worn at the left toe, but the laces double-knotted with care. Somebody had taught her to tie her shoes right. A friendship bracelet on one wrist, faded, the kind kids make each other. And on the inside of her forearm, in ballpoint pen gone smeary from the rain but still legible, somebody had written a phone number, written it on her skin. You only do that when you're afraid a child might have to give it to a stranger, when you're afraid you won't be there to give it yourself. That number told me more than any words could have. Somewhere out in that storm was a woman who'd looked at her daughter and thought, I might not make it, write it on her arm. I wrote the number in my ledger, force of habit, and the only smart thing I did that night. Morning came grudging and gray. The storm had blown itself out but left the whole world dripping and brown. I went to check on Wren and found the cot empty and my heart went straight up into my throat until I heard the small sounds from the kitchen and found her standing on a chair at my counter, methodically making toast. 4 slices. She'd found the bread. She'd figured out my temperamental toaster that even I have to hit twice, and she'd set out 2 plates. She'd made breakfast for both of us. A child who wouldn't speak had decided, sometime in the night, that we were a household. The tin sat on the counter beside the plates, where she could see it. You cook, I said. That's a useful skill. I mostly burn things and call it flavor. The corner of her mouth moved. Not a smile, the blueprint of one. We ate the toast. I made a fresh point of not looking at the tin. And when she'd finished, when she'd wiped her mouth on the back of her hand and squared her small shoulders like she was about to lift something heavy, she pushed the tin across the counter toward me. Mama said, Wren told me, you're supposed to look, and then you're supposed to tell people because nobody believed her. I looked at the tin a long moment before I touched it. I want to tell you I had a feeling that some cowboy instinct warned me my quiet, ruined, half-decent life was about to end. But the truth is I just saw a child asking me to keep a promise she'd inherited, and I couldn't have said no to that if you'd held a gun on me. I opened the tin. Inside, wrapped in a plastic sandwich bag against the wet, was a cheap prepaid cell phone, an SD memory card, the little kind, in its own bag, a single photograph, creased soft from handling, and a folded piece of yellow legal paper, damp at the edges but readable, covered front and back in a woman's cramped, hurried handwriting. The photograph I looked at first. It showed a young woman, early 20s maybe, laughing at something off camera, standing on a dock at the edge of a mountain lake I didn't recognize. Pretty girl. Alive in the way photographs of the dead are terrible for being. Behind her, out of focus, a big house rose up out of the pines. Expensive, the kind of house that has its own name. I turned the photo over. On the back, in the same cramped hand as the legal paper, Kayla, she didn't fall. I set it down very carefully. Then I read the letter. I'm not going to give you the whole of it here. Some of it wasn't mine to keep, and some of it I still can't put in a straight line without my chest going tight. But I'll tell you the shape of it, because you need the shape to understand everything that came after. The woman who wrote it was named Delia Suarez. She was Wren's mother. For 3 summers, she'd worked as a housekeeper and cook at a lodge called Blackwater, up on a private lake 2 counties north, a lodge owned by a man named Harlan Voss. You might know that name now. Back then, all it meant to me was a face on a highway billboard and a voice on the radio around election time. Senator Harlan Voss, rancher's friend, they said, man of the people, the kind of politician who wears a barn coat for the cameras and has never in his life pulled a calf at 2 in the morning. Delia's letter told a different man. The summer before, there'd been a girl at the lodge. Kayla, the girl in the photograph. 23 years old, worked as an assistant to one of the senator's people, spent a lot of weekends at Blackwater. Delia had liked her. Kayla used to sit in the kitchen while Delia cooked and talk about a boy she was going to marry, and the nursing degree she was 2 semesters from finishing. One night in August, Kayla drowned in the lake off the Blackwater dock. The story that reached the papers, the small mention it got, was that she'd been drinking, gone for a late swim, and gotten into trouble in the cold water. Tragic accident. Case closed inside of a week. Delia had been at the lodge that night, and Delia's letter said the story was a lie. She'd heard the fight. Kayla and the senator in his study, voices raised past the point where money keeps things quiet. She'd heard Kayla say she was going to tell, that she had proof, that she wasn't going to be paid off and sent away. She'd heard the senator's voice drop into something Delia didn't have a word for except cold. And later, she wasn't sure how much later, she'd been trying not to be seen. She'd looked out the pantry window and watched two men who worked security for Voss carry something down to the dock in the dark. She never saw exactly what happened. She wanted me to know that. She was an honest woman even in her fear, and she wrote it plain. I did not see him do it. I saw enough to know they made sure of her, and I saw enough to know they'd make sure of me. What Kayla had said she had the proof, Delia found later. Kayla had left it with her that same night before the fight, had pressed the phone and the card into Delia's hands in the kitchen and said, "Hold this for me, just for tonight." And then Kayla went to the study and never came back for it. So Delia had it. For a year she had it, and she was too frightened to do anything but hide it because she'd gone to the county sheriff exactly once early on, and by the next morning a man in a nice car had come to the little house she rented and explained to her, very politely, all the ways an undocumented woman with a daughter could lose everything. He never raised his voice. He didn't have to. Nobody believed me, the letter said, and the ones who believed me were the ones I was afraid of. The last paragraph was written in a different, faster hand. The ink pressed harder. She'd known writing it that time had run out. They found out I still have it. A man came to the diner where I work now and said my name and Wren's name and smiled. I'm going to take Wren somewhere safe, and then I'm going to lead them away from her. If you are reading this, find someone who keeps records. Someone plain and stubborn who nobody paid. Make them look. Make them tell. Kayla was going to be a nurse. She was going to help people her whole life. Don't let her be a woman who drank too much and fell, please. Her name was Kayla Ann Merrick, and she did not fall. I read it twice. Then I set it down on my kitchen counter next to the toast crumbs, and I sat there while the coffee went cold and the mare stamped in her stall, and the whole ordinary morning went on around me like nothing had changed. Everything had changed, I just hadn't caught up to it yet. I looked at Wren. She was watching me with those checking things off eyes, and I understood now what she'd been checking, whether I was the kind of man who'd look, whether I was the kind who'd tell. "Where's your mama now, Wren?" I asked, gentle as I could. She didn't cry. That's the part that broke me, if you want to know. A child that age, you expect tears, and there weren't any. She'd used them all up somewhere back down the road. She just held my gaze and said, "She put me on a bus. She said get off at the last stop and find a place with animals and a light on. She said she'd come find me." A beat. She said if it was a real long time, I should show somebody the tin. "How long's it been?" Wren looked at her arm, at the smeared phone number, like it might tell her. 9 days, she said. 9 days. A 9-year-old on her own 9 days, and she'd made it 140 miles, and found the one ranch with its barn light on in a midnight storm because her mother, God rest whatever was left of her, had aimed her like an arrow at exactly the kind of fool who couldn't turn her away. I got up. I went to the window so she wouldn't see my face for a second. Out past the corral, the mountains had their first snow up top, and I stood there and did some hard arithmetic that had nothing to do with numbers. A senator, a dead girl in a lake, a woman missing 9 days with men smiling her daughter's name at her, and a phone and a card sitting on my kitchen counter that were, near as I could figure, the only reason any of it might ever come to light, and also the only reason 3 people were now in a story that people had already been killed for. I could put it back in the tin. I could drive Wren to the county seat and hand her and the tin to Sheriff Del Pruitt, who was a decent enough man, and wash my hands of it. That was the sane play. That was what a man with any sense of self-preservation does. But Delia had already tried the sheriff, and I kept thinking about that man in the nice car who never raised his voice. I didn't know how deep Voss's reach went into 2 counties, but a man who could turn a murder into a swimming accident in 1 week had reach enough that I wasn't going to gamble a little girl's life finding out where it stopped. Find someone plain and stubborn who nobody paid. Well, she'd found him, whether he wanted the job or not. I did 2 things that morning that I wrote down in my ledger and have never regretted, and 1 thing I didn't write down and have never stopped thinking about. The first, I did not call the county sheriff. Instead, I drove with Wren and the tin on the bench seat beside me, because I was not about to let either out of my sight over the ridge road to the Naich place. Toby Naich and I had known each other 40 years. We'd been boys together, more or less, back when his grandmother still ran cattle on the reservation land that butted up against my father's lease. And there'd been a stretch in our 20s where we didn't speak on account of something stupid that I started and he had every right to be angry about. We'd made it up. You do, if you're lucky and you both live long enough. Toby ranched a good spread now and wore a deputy's star part-time, mostly for the county's benefit rather than the pay, because he was the only lawman for 40 miles that folks out here actually trusted, and both the reservation and the ranch families would talk to him when they wouldn't talk to anybody else. If there was one man in this country I'd trust with a child's life and a dead girl's name, it was Toby. I found him at his corral, worm calves, sleeves rolled, and when he saw my face, he set down what he was doing without a word. He's like that. Toby reads weather in a man the way I read it in the sky. I told him, all of it on his porch, while Ren sat inside with his wife Anna and ate a real breakfast for the first time in 9 days. I laid out the tin on the boards between us, the phone, the card, the photo, the letter, and I watched my oldest friend go very still in the way he does when something has made him angry down where he keeps it. He read Delia's letter twice, same as I had. He looked at the back of Kayla's photo a long time. Then he looked out at his mountains and was quiet, and when he spoke his voice had that even, careful weight to it that I'd learned over 40 years meant he'd already decided something hard. "You know what this is, Cal?" he said. It wasn't a question. "I know what it might be." "No," he tapped the letter once. "You know what it is. A woman told the truth and the system taught her daughter that the truth is a thing you carry in a lunch box because there's nowhere safe to set it down." He shook his head slowly. "I've seen that lesson taught before. I've had it taught to my own family more than once by men who never went to jail for it." He looked at me. "The question isn't what it is. The question is whether you understand what happens now to the people who touch it." I did. Or I thought I did. "You don't have to be one of them," I said. "This is my mess. I brought it up here because I trust you to tell me straight, not to hand it to you." Toby almost smiled. Almost. "Cal," he said, "a little girl rode a bus 140 miles and walked into a storm to find a man decent enough to help her. And you drove her straight to me. You already handed it to me. You just did it by being who you are." He stood, settled his hat. "First thing, nobody official hears about that tin until we've made copies of what's on it and put those copies somewhere Harlan Voss can't reach with a phone call. You understand? The evidence dies the second it's the only copy in a county evidence room. We make it unkillable first. Then we decide who to trust with it." That was the thing about Toby. I'd come up the ridge with a moral problem. He turned it in about 4 minutes into a plan. The second thing I did that morning was help him do exactly that. We drove into town, not the county seat, the little crossroads town with a library that had public computers and a librarian named Francis who'd known Toby since Christ was a corporal and asked no questions when he asked her to let him use the back office with the door shut. We copied the SD card onto 3 thumb drives. He photographed every page of Delia's letter, front and back, and Kayla's picture, and mailed one set. I want you to appreciate this, because it's the plainest, most stubborn thing I've ever done, in a padded envelope to myself at my own ranch. So there'd be a copy with a postmark and a date that no evidence room controlled. Toby took 1 thumb drive. Frances, without being told what was on it, took one and put it somewhere in the library she wouldn't tell us so we couldn't be made to. And the phone, we'd charged it in the truck. When it came on, there was a video on it, just one. I'm not going to describe that video to you. Toby and I watched it once, in the back office of a country library with the door shut, and neither of us has spoken of what's in it to this day, except to the people who needed to see it under oath. I'll only tell you this. It was Kayla filming herself, the night she died, in a whisper, saying who she was and what she knew and who she was afraid of, and holding up a document I couldn't read the fine print of, but Toby could, a document with the senator's signature on it, and figures that explained, all at once, why a girl who was going to be a nurse had become a girl who drank too much and fell. When it ended, Toby set the phone down face down on the desk, very gently, like it was still a person. "She left a record," he said quietly. "Smart girl. She knew nobody would believe her either, so she made it so they wouldn't have to. They'd only have to watch." He rubbed his face. "God, she was younger than my daughter." The third thing, the one I didn't write down, was this. On the drive back up the ridge, Ren asleep against Toby's shoulder in the back of the truck, I asked him the question I'd been carrying since the porch. "You think Delia's alive?" Toby didn't answer right away. He watched the road. And then he said in that even voice, "You already know, Cal, same as I do. You've known since you read the letter." A long pause. "The kindness we can do her now isn't hoping. It's making the thing she died to protect impossible to bury." I didn't write that down because some things you don't need a ledger for. You carry them somewhere the ink can't fade. We came over the last rise to Dry Fork just before dusk, and I knew before we'd fully crested it that something was wrong, because I keep an accounting of my own place the way I keep everything, and the accounting was off. My front gate was open. I never leave my front gate open. And there was a vehicle in my yard I'd never seen. A clean, dark SUV, the kind that has never once had mud packed in its wheel wells, parked square in front of my house like it owned the ground. A man was standing on my porch with his back to us, looking in through my front window with his hands cupped around his eyes. Toby put his hand out flat, low, the old signal, stop, don't react, let me think, and eased the truck to a halt behind the ridgeline where we couldn't be seen. In the back seat, Wren stirred and came awake and looked out the windshield at the SUV, and I watched the color drain right out of that child's face. "That's the man," she whispered. "That's the man who smiled." Toby Naich had been a lawman on and off for 20 years, and I'd watched him talk a drunk man off a bridge and a bull off a fence, and a grieving father out of doing something he couldn't undo. So when the man who smiled turned out to be standing on my porch, I figured Toby'd have a plan, and I was right, and I hated it. "You two get down in the seat," he said, quiet and even, already reaching back to guide Wren's head below the window. "I'm going to drive down there like a deputy who got a call about a strange vehicle, because that's exactly what I am. I'm going to be friendly and slow and a little bit dumb. And Cal," he looked at me, "you keep her down and you keep your mouth shut no matter what you hear, because the second that man knows the girl is here, none of us drive off this ranch. You understand me?" I understood him. I got down in the footwell with Wren pulled tight against me. The tin, we'd kept the original, copies made pressed between us, and I felt her heart going like a rabbit's, and I put my hand over the back of her head the way you'd shield a child from a hailstorm, and I whispered the only true thing I had. "I've got you. I've got you. He's not getting past me." Toby drove down into my own yard as easy as Sunday. I couldn't see, I could only hear. And I'm going to give you what I heard because I've gone over it in my mind 10,000 times, and it never gets less strange to me, how ordinary evil sounds when it's being polite. "Evening," Toby called out, tin star catching the last light, I imagine. "Coldwater County. We got a report of an unfamiliar vehicle out here. Folks watch out for each other on these roads. You lost." "Not lost," a pleasant voice, educated, unhurried, the voice of a man who has never once been afraid of a consequence. "Just checking on an old friend, Cal Renner, this is his place." "It is. Cal's not home. He's over helping me pull a bull out of a bog, be there half the night at this rate." Toby laughed, easy. "You a friend of Cal's? Didn't know Cal had friends in vehicles that clean." The man laughed too. They laughed together, two men in my yard, and one of them had smiled a woman's daughter's name at her. "Mutual acquaintance, really. I'm trying to track down a woman who used to work for a colleague of mine, Delia Suarez. She's got a little girl, the family's worried, wondering if the child made her way out this direction. You see a little girl come through? 8, 9 years old." And here is where I learned exactly who Toby Naich was, once and for all, 40 years in. "A little girl," he said, and I heard him lean on the truck, settling in all the time in the world. "Out here, mister, the nearest little girl to this spot is my granddaughter, and she's asleep at my daughter's place in Whitecap with a broke arm from falling off a horse she wasn't supposed to be on." A chuckle. "No, no little girls out here, just cattle and old men, but you leave me a number, and if one wanders up out of the sagebrush, I'll surely call. Your name." A pause, the tiniest pause. The man had not expected to be asked for his name by the law. "Reese," the man said. "Just Reese is fine." "Well, Mr. Reese." I heard Toby's boots on the gravel, moving, positioning. I understood later he'd put himself between the SUV and the road, casual as anything, so the man would have to be rude to leave in a hurry. "You get on before dark. These roads flood after a storm, and that pretty rig of yours doesn't look like it likes mud." There was a silence then that lasted about 100 years. In the footwell, Wren had stopped breathing. I could feel her not breathing. I put my mouth right against her ear and shaped the word safe without any sound at all. And then, mercifully, I heard the SUV door, the engine. The clean, expensive purr of it pulling out through my open gate and down my road. Toby stood in my yard and watched it every foot of the way to the county road. And only when it was well and truly gone did he come and open the truck door and let us up out of the dark. His face was gray. The easy deputy was gone entirely. "Copies," he said. Tonight, all of them everywhere we can put them, because that man was not checking a welfare report. He looked at Ren, and his voice gentled without losing its steel. You did real good, honey. You were brave and you were quiet, and that's exactly what your mama would have wanted. Now I need you to be brave a little longer. Ren looked up at him, and she asked the question that neither of us had the courage to ask her. Is that the man who took my mama? Toby crouched down to her level, slow, so she could see him coming the way you approach a spooked thing. He didn't lie to her. I'll love him forever for that. He also didn't hand a 9-year-old the whole terrible weight of the truth. I don't know for sure, he said, but I think he's part of something that hurt your mama, yes. And I think you carried the very thing that's going to make them answer for it 140 miles without ever once dropping it. He put his big weathered hand over her small one where it gripped the tin. That's the bravest thing I've seen a person do, Ren, grown or otherwise, you hear me. She heard him, and something in her, some little load-bearing thing that had been holding up too much for too long, finally let her put her head down on Toby Nature's shoulder and cry, right there in my yard in the last of the light. I turned away and wrote dusk, clear, wind died in my ledger, because I didn't have anywhere else to put what I was feeling, and the ledger's never turned me down yet. We didn't stay at Dry Fork that night. Reese knew my place now. It wasn't safe. We went up to the Nate spread, where Anna had supper on, and where the roads in were the kind that a man in a clean SUV couldn't come up without being seen a mile off by 3 separate families who'd get on the phone about it. That night after Ren was finally asleep, really asleep, in a real bed, with Anna sitting beside her stroking her hair and humming something low in a language I don't speak, but recognized as the sound a woman makes to keep the dark off a child. Toby and I sat at his kitchen table and made the hardest set of decisions of my life. Because here's the thing nobody tells you about having the truth in your hands. Having it isn't the hard part, aiming it is. We had proof a United States senator had covered up a killing. We were 2 ranchers and a librarian and a 9-year-old. Between the truth and the world stood a whole architecture of people paid to keep that truth from ever landing. The county sheriff Delia had already tried, who might be honest or might be bought, and we had no way to know which. The state authorities, who were a long way off and full of people who owed Voss favors. The press, which might listen to us or might make one phone call to the senator's office to get comment and hand him a day's warning to bury everything and everyone. We can't hand it to just anybody, Toby said. One wrong door and it all disappears and us with it, and that little girl's mother died for nothing. So who, I said, there's got to be somebody in this whole country who can't be reached. Toby was quiet a while, turning his coffee cup. And then he said a name I didn't expect. There's a woman, he said. Reporter, national, not local, used to be local, started out on the reservation beat 20 years back, which is how I know her. Name's Priya Venkat. She did the story on the water rights when nobody else would touch it, and Voss's people leaned on her editor to kill it, and she published it anyway and dared them to sue. They didn't because it was true, and she knew it was true because she'd done the work. He tapped the table. She's the only journalist I've ever met that I'd trust to not call the senator's office for comment before the story was locked, because she's been burned by exactly that. You still know how to reach her. I've got a number, whether it still works after 15 years, he shrugged. We try and Cal, he leaned forward. We do not send her the files first. We send her the story. We get her to come here. Because the second those files leave our hands into the internet, we lose control of when it breaks, and I want us to break it on a day we've chosen with the girl somewhere safe and every copy already sitting with people it can't be unsent from. You break a thing like this wrong, it doesn't just fail. It gets people killed. It's already gotten 2. 2, Kayla. And though neither of us would say it out loud with Ren under the same roof, Delia. We called Priya Venkat's number at 11 o'clock that night from Toby's kitchen. It rang 4 times, and a tired woman's voice answered, wary, and Toby said, Priya, it's Tobias Nate, Coldwater County, the water rights. And there was a silence, and then the tired voice woke all the way up and said, Toby, my God, what's wrong? Because she knew from the hour and the weight in his voice, that a man like Toby doesn't call a reporter after 15 years to catch up. He told her the shape of it. Not on the phone, you don't put a thing like this on a phone, just the shape, just enough. A dead girl called an accident, a witness now missing, a child who'd carried the proof out on a bus, and a name. When Toby said the name Harlan Voss, I heard Priya Venkat go very quiet on the other end of the line, the specific quiet of a person who has waited a long time for a particular door to finally open. I've had that man's name in a drawer for 11 years, she said. Every reporter who covers the West does. He's careful. He's always been careful. Nobody's ever been able to touch him because there's never once been a piece of paper with his name on it. A breath. You're telling me there's a piece of paper. I'm telling you there's more than paper, Toby said. But it doesn't leave this county over a phone line, and it doesn't leave it into a machine that decides for us when it breaks. You want it, you come to me. And you come alone, and you come quiet, and you understand that from the minute you turn off the highway, you're one of the people they'll come for. That's the deal. That's the only deal. I'll be there tomorrow night, Priya Venkat said, without 1 second of hesitation. And I understood then that there are more kinds of stubborn in this world than the ranching kind, and thank God for all of them. I should tell you about the day in between, because it's the day I made the decision I'd promised you at the start, the morally heavy one, and I've never been sure I got it right. Morning came and Wren wouldn't eat. She'd been eating fine, Anna's cooking would raise the dead. But that morning she sat at the table with her hands in her lap and her food untouched, and that faraway checking things off looked worse than I'd seen it. And finally she said to nobody to the table, "She's not coming to find me, is she?" Nobody answered for a second. And I watched the adults in that kitchen, me, Toby, Anna, all reach for the lie at the same time. The kind lie, of course she is, honey, don't you worry. I saw it rise up in all three of us because it's what you do, it's the reflex. You protect a child from the hard thing. And I thought about Delia. Delia who'd written, even in her terror, I did not see him do it, because she wouldn't put her name to a thing she hadn't seen with her own eyes. Delia who'd raised a daughter who double-knotted her laces and made toast for a stranger and carried the truth 140 miles because her mother had taught her that the truth is the one thing you don't put down. I couldn't lie to that woman's child. I found I just couldn't do it. So I made my decision. I'll tell you what it was, and you can judge me. I got up from my chair and I went around the table and I crouched down beside Wren the way Toby had, so she could see me coming, and I said, "Wren, I'm going to tell you the truth because your mama raised you on the truth, and I'm not going to be the man who feeds you a lie now. All right." She looked at me, she nodded once. She was more ready for it than any of us. "I don't know where your mama is," I said. "That's God's honest. But your mama was smart, and she was brave, and she loved you more than her own life, and she did something almost nobody has the courage to do. She made sure that even if the worst happened to her, the truth she was carrying wouldn't die with her. She made sure of that by giving it to you, and you kept it safe. And because you kept it safe, tomorrow a woman's coming here who's going to help us tell the whole world what happened. And the men who hurt Kayla, and who I think hurt your mama, they're not going to get to smile about it anymore. They're going to have to answer for it. In front of everybody, because of what you carried." I took a breath. This was the part I wasn't sure of. "I can't promise you your mama's coming back," I said. "I want to. I want to so bad. But I'm not going to make you a promise I don't know I can keep because you deserve better than that and because she would have told me not to. What I can promise you, and I'll write it in my book, and I've never once broken a thing I wrote in my book, is that you are not alone anymore. Not tonight, not tomorrow, not for as long as I'm breathing. You've got a place with animals and a light on, and the light stays on. That's a promise I can keep, so that's the one I'll make." Wren looked at me for a long time. 9 years old, and she weighed me, the way her mother must have weighed the sheriff and the man in the nice car, all those years of learning who to trust the hard way. And then she did something I did not expect and was not ready for. She reached over and picked up the tin off the table where it sat beside her plate. She'd stopped clutching it sometime in the night, had let it just sit near her, which I only realized then was its own small, enormous thing, and she held it out to me. To keep. "You write things down," she said. "Mama said find a man who writes things down." A pause. "You should hold it now, I'm tired. I have carried a great deal in my life. Coffins, 2 of them my father's and my wife's. Newborn calves through snow. But I have never held anything as heavy as that rusted lunch tin when a 9-year-old girl decided I was strong enough to carry it so she could finally set it down. I took it, I said, "I've got it, you rest." And Wren put her head down on the kitchen table and slept. Right there, in the middle of the morning, the deep, bottomless sleep of a small soldier who's finally been relieved of her post. I wrote it in my ledger. She gave me the tin. She let herself be a child. Then I sat and watched her sleep, and I did not trust my voice for a good long while. Was it the right call telling her the truth? I still don't know. There are nights I think I should have given her the kind lie, let her keep hoping a while longer, let her be 9. But then I think she knew. She already knew before I said a word. All the lie would have done is teach her that the one adult left who'd promised her the truth would fold when the truth got hard, same as everyone before. And I couldn't be one more of those, even to spare her. Especially to spare her. Toby later put his hand on my shoulder and said, "You did right." He didn't elaborate. Toby never elaborates. But he'd been where I was. I knew the shape of his history well enough to know he'd sat at a table once and had to decide whether to lie to a child about where somebody went. And coming from him, 3 words was a whole benediction. Priya Venkat came the next night alone. In a rented car she'd deliberately gotten muddy on purpose so it wouldn't look clean like Reese's, which told me before I met her that Toby had judged her right. She was maybe 50, sharp-eyed, quiet, and she cried exactly once when she watched Kayla's video in Toby's kitchen with the door shut. And then she wiped her face and got very, very calm and very, very focused, the way I imagine surgeons do. "Okay," she said when it was done. "Okay. Here's how a thing like this actually works, and here's how they'll try to kill it, and here's how we make it so they can't." She talked for 2 hours. Toby took notes. I took notes because that's what I do. And a plan came together at that kitchen table that was so much bigger and more careful than anything 2 ranchers could have built alone that I understood, finally, why Delia's letter had said find someone who keeps records and not find someone strong. It was never about strength. Voss had all the strength. It was about the record. It was about making the truth unkillable, and then handing it, all at once, to the one kind of person whose entire job is to refuse to look away. We were 3 days from breaking it. 3 days, Priya said, to verify what she could independently, to line up a second reporter at a second outlet so it couldn't be spiked by pressure on any one editor, to get the files copied to lawyers whose job would be to protect them. 3 days. We didn't have 3 days. Because on the second night, the night before we were going to break the biggest story that country had ever seen, I woke at 2 in the morning to Toby's dogs going insane, and then to headlights sweeping across the ceiling of the room where I was sleeping. And then to the sound, unmistakable and wrong out here where no one comes at 2 a.m., of more than one vehicle coming fast up the long road to the Nache place. They'd found us. And Ren and the tin, and every copy of the truth Delia Suarez died for, were all under one roof. I have thought a great deal in the years since about how they found us. Priya had the answer later, and it was so ordinary it made me sick. The phone. Kayla's cheap prepaid phone, the one with the video, the one we'd charged in the truck and turned on in the library. Turn on a phone, even for a minute, even an old one, and it reaches for a tower and a man with enough reach. A man like Voss, with people at every level who owed him, can, given a little time, find out which tower it reached for. We'd been careful about almost everything. We'd been careful the way ranchers are careful, which is to say about the physical world. We hadn't understood the invisible one. Kayla had known enough to leave a video. She hadn't known enough, nobody had back then, to know that the very thing that saved her testimony would, a year later, draw them right to the child who carried it. But that's hindsight. That night all I knew was headlights and dogs and the specific cold that comes over you when the safe place stops being safe. Toby was already up. Of course he was. He slept like a lawman, which is to say barely. He came down the hall pulling on his boots with a rifle in one hand and his phone in the other, and he was calm, God. He was so calm, and calm is the most terrifying thing in the world when you know the man being calm understands exactly how bad it is. "Anna," he said low. "Ren, the root cellar now the back way, you know the one. Take the tin." He looked at me. "Cal, the copies, you mailed one to yourself. Francis has one. I've got one at my daughter's. Priya has her own now. Say it back to me." "Postmarked one at my place, Francis at the library, your daughter's, Priya's," I said. My voice didn't shake. I don't know how it didn't shake. "Right, so here's the truth, and I want you to hold on to it no matter what happens in the next 10 minutes. He gripped my shoulder hard and looked me dead in the eye. "They can't win this anymore. It's already out of 1 box into 5. Whatever they do here tonight, they lost the second that little girl walked into your barn because the truth stopped being something they could reach. All they can do now is make it cost us. Don't let them make it cost the girl. Everything else we can lose. Everything else we can lose. I've had a lot of men say a lot of things to me in a long life. That's the one I'd want on my stone." Anna had run already. The child had woken silent, that terrible learned silence, and gone with Anna into the dark of the house toward the root cellar without a sound, the tin in her arms one last time. And I remember, this is the thing I remember, out of all of it, that as Anna pulled her toward the back of the house, Wren stopped and turned and looked back at me across that dark kitchen. And she didn't look scared. She looked like she was checking something off a list, making sure the man who writes things down was still standing where she'd left him. I stood where she left me, I want you to know that. Whatever else I got wrong, I stood where she could see me, right up until the dark took her. I'm not going to make it into more than it was. There were no gunfights. Toby wouldn't have allowed one, and neither would I. We were two old men and a reporter against however many Voss had sent, and dead heroes don't testify. What there was, instead, was the strangest and most terrible hour of my life, and it went like this. 2 SUVs, 4 men, and out of the first one, unhurried in a barn coat that had never seen a barn, stepped a face I'd only known from billboards. Harlan Voss had come himself. I understood, watching him step out into Toby's yard in the wash of his own headlights, exactly how a man like that ends up where he ended up. He wasn't afraid. He should have been. He'd driven into the middle of the reservation-adjacent ranch country of a county where he was hated in the dark, to lean on people who had every reason to hate him. And he wasn't afraid, because in 50-odd years of life, nothing bad had ever once happened to him, and a man like that stops believing anything bad can. He'd cleaned up a dead girl in a week. He'd made a witness vanish. He genuinely believed, walking into that yard, that this was one more thing that would go the way things went for him. He was polite, that's the part I can't get past, even now. He was so polite. "Deputy Naich," he said, warm as anything, as if they were old friends. "I'm sorry for the hour, and you must be Mr. Renner. I've heard your name." He smiled at me. He smiled the smile that had smiled Wren's name at Delia in a diner. "Gentlemen, I think there's been a terrible misunderstanding, and I'd like to clear it up before anybody does something we'll all regret. I understand you've come into possession of some property that isn't yours. Some very sad, very private property relating to a tragedy that broke a lot of hearts. And I understand there's a little girl involved, whose mother, God rest her, got some very confused ideas in her head before she passed. I only want to make sure that child is safe, and that this sad business gets handled with the dignity those poor young women deserve, instead of being dragged through the mud by people who don't understand what they're looking at." He spread his hands, reasonable, grieving even. He was good, I'll give the devil that. If I hadn't read Delia's letter, if I hadn't watched Kayla whisper into that phone, I might have believed him myself. And then Toby Naich did the thing I will tell my grandchildren about, if I ever have any. He didn't raise the rifle. He didn't raise his voice. He reached into his coat slow, and he took out his phone, and he held it up so its screen faced the senator, and on that screen was a little red dot and a running timer, and Toby said in that even, patient, 40 years of my life voice, "Senator, everything you've said since you got out of that vehicle has been recorded and is uploading live to 4 different places as we speak, one of them a reporter's phone. So has your arrival. So has the fact that you personally drove out here in the middle of the night with 4 men to recover evidence in a death you told the world was an accident." He tilted his head. "Now, you can keep talking. I'd like it if you kept talking honestly. Or you can get back in your vehicle and drive away, and we'll see each other again in a courtroom. But either way, sir, and I want to be real clear about this, because I don't think anyone said it plainly to you in a long, long time, there is no version of tonight where you drive off this ranch with the truth. The truth left the building days ago. You came all this way to catch something that's already gone." I watched Harlan Voss's face in the headlights. I watched it happen the exact moment a man who has never once been afraid learns what fear is, late all at once, in middle age, in a yard on a mountain in front of a rifle he'd have preferred to a phone. His face didn't crumple. It did something worse. It went still, the way a thing goes still when the ground it's built on turns out not to be there. He glanced at the men he'd brought. And the men he'd brought, I'll never forget this, took one look at that little red recording light and shifted their weight backward, away from him. Because they were hired men, and hired men do the math fast, and the math had just changed. He didn't say anything for a moment. And then Harlan Voss, United States Senator, said the only true thing I ever heard come out of his mouth, and he said it quiet, almost to himself. "You people don't know what you've done." "No, sir," Toby said. "We know exactly what we've done. It's you that never learned." He nodded toward the SUVs. "Drive safe. Roads flood after a storm." And they left. That's the anticlimax of it, the thing that doesn't play like the movies. They just got in their vehicles and left because there was nothing else to do, because Toby had made the only weapon that mattered, the truth, impossible to take back. And a man can't shoot his way out of a story that's already told. 4 men and a senator drove down off that mountain in the dark, and the truth stayed up top with us, in a root cellar, in the arms of a sleeping child. It broke 6 days later. Not 3, Priya took the extra time to make it unkillable to line up the second outlet, the lawyers, the works. When it broke everywhere at once, in a way that no phone call to any office could stop, and I'm not going to walk you through the months that followed because you can read them yourself if you care to. It was in every paper in the country for a while. The video, Delia's letter, entered into evidence. Kayla Ann Merrick's name, said out loud correctly by people who had to look at what happened to her instead of away. Harlan Voss did not go quietly, and he did not go all at once. Men like that never do. They have lawyers and friends and a long, ugly fall. But he fell. That's the part that matters. He fell, and he was still falling, last I checked, through appeals and delays, but the direction was down and it stayed down, and the girl who was going to be a nurse stopped being, in the official record of the world, a woman who drank too much and slipped. Priya made sure the correction was as loud as the lie had been quiet. That was the whole of it, really. That was what Delia died for. Not revenge, a correction. The truth entered into the record where it couldn't be erased. They found Delia in the spring. I'll tell you that much and no more, because Wren may read this someday, and there are things a daughter doesn't need laid out. They found her, and they were able to give her back to the ground properly, with her name and her daughter present, and a stone that told the truth about her. And if you want to know whether Toby was right that night in the truck, whether we'd both known from the letter, the answer is yes. We'd known. Some kindnesses are just making sure the person got to matter. Wren didn't cry at the funeral. I want to tell you she did, because it'd be tidier, but she didn't. She stood between me and Anna in a dark dress Anna had sewn her, and she held my hand on one side and Anna's on the other. And when it was done, she looked up at me and asked if she could see the horses when we got home. When we got home, she said it like it was already true, and I suppose it was. She lives with me now. It took the better part of a year and more paperwork than I'd have thought a person's whole life could generate. And Toby stood up for me in front of a judge, and Priya wrote a letter, and Anna taught me things about raising a girl that I'd have had no business knowing otherwise. And in the end, a court agreed that a stubborn old widower with a ranch and a light that stays on was a fit place for Delia Suarez's daughter to grow up. I don't know that I agree with the court. I have doubts most days. But Wren doesn't seem to, and she's the one who'd know. She's 12 now, she keeps a ledger. I did not ask her to, and I did not teach her to. She just started one day, a spiral notebook, whether in the top corner, and now she writes down the calves born and the fences mended and the money owed, same as I do. And when I asked her once why she started, she said, without looking up, so it happened. So somebody wrote it down that it happened. She still has the tin. It sits on her windowsill, empty now, the evidence long since gone where evidence goes. She keeps a bird's nest in it that fell out of the barn eaves one spring. A wren's nest, as it happens, though I don't think that's why, or maybe it is. She doesn't say, and I've learned not to ask a child to explain the things she keeps. Some nights when the weather's bad, I catch her standing at the window with her hand on that tin, looking out at the dark the way she looked out of my barn door the first night, checking things off a list only she can see. And I never know on those nights whether she's remembering her mother or thanking her or asking her something. I don't ask. I just make sure the light's on, the porch light, the one that says there's a place here with animals and a light on, the one I promised her would stay on for as long as I'm breathing. I'm an old man now. My hands shake worse than they did, and the ledger's about the only place I can still write a straight line. But I've kept my accounting honest, same as I always have, and this is the last of it, the truest thing in all my books.